Hey everyone, it's Adam Tracy, and I wanted to talk about the Georgian FIZ crypto license. And FIZ stands for Free Industrial Zone, which you see like primarily in the Emirates and places like that, where they're basically like tax-free or tax-advantaged areas where if you locate your business or become licensed in that area that's managed by some subset of government or some quasi government entity, then you reap these benefits. So the Georgian FIZ license is particularly beneficial because one, it allows you to do anything. It's a one size fits all license, right? So from crypto exchange, crypto custody, token issuance, you name it, you can do it. And it's not governed by the central bank of Georgia. It's governed by the entity which manages the free industrial zone. So you have 0% taxation on your operations from the zone. The license itself is not heavily regulated nor particularly difficult to obtain. It's sort of like just the typical VASP application with like a business plan, copies of AML, KYC policies, and the like. And it's not overly burdensome to maintain or regulate on an ongoing basis, which is great. Also, there's no particular capital requirement. Like the language of the license is adequate, and for a startup, adequate can be very minimal. Of course, in order to reap the benefit of the free industrial zone, because Georgia does have a license in general, right, for outside of the free industrial zone, you must maintain an office presence within there, which isn't typically difficult nor expensive, especially when you consider exchange rates. And you usually need one, possibly two admin level employees to operate or reside, work at the office, which again isn't terribly burdensome, but that meets the requirements, right? And when you weigh that versus what it costs, like what the capital requirement would be, and like that, it actually is still quite the deal. So there are some restrictions, of course. Like one, you cannot serve Georgian persons, which isn't terribly bothersome. Two, you have to be mindful of activities that are in fact regulated outside the free industrial zone, particularly payments, right? So you can't have that back end sort of like payment transfer interface, right? Um, which would limit you in the sense of like issuing debit cards against that, and some other value add services, which for like an exchange isn't necessarily essential, but some people like to do. But it is overall excellent, low cost. The timing, you do need obviously a Georgian LLC. That can take like 2 to 3 weeks. To obtain the license can take an additional month and a half, right? But that's still pretty quick by all, meaningful accounts and when comparing it to other jurisdictions. And of course, you have a nice soft place where you can sort of operate with, various levels of deregulation, which is obviously the goal. Um, the license itself doesn't necessarily passport, but it kind of takes on that offshore persona where, depending on where you are in the world, you don't have an issue onboarding clients. Obviously, the US is always going to be an issue given our application of laws versus elsewhere, but the rest of the world is pretty much fair play. And when you consider the fact that Georgia's in Asia, it's a very easy entree to what would be an otherwise significant market in Asia, right? So, all in all, it's a great place, right? And I think even for token issuances, and for a long time I've said, what's the point of like a license for a token issuance? Because like even in the United States, you don't need a license to issue a token. Well, now it's becoming more prevalent, right? And you see people like, running to throw hundreds of thousands of dollars with the token license in Anguilla, which it's just window dressing, right? But as more entities, including the EU through MICA, like want some form of licensing or additional regulation put upon the issuers of tokens of all kinds, right? The optics of having one sometimes are beneficial. And for Georgia, which is actually a fairly developed country, to say that you have a license there and also the back end advantages that inure to the issuer, it's worth taking a look. And then obviously for an exchange or custodian, anything like that, it is it's definitely a real place and a real license to really consider. And I don't see it changing, right? I mean, they really sort of like copied the Dubai model, but made it a lot easier, the Dubai free zone model, but just made it considerably less expensive and far easier to obtain the license and maintain the license, right? So that is the Georgia FIZ Free Industrial Zone crypto license. If you have any questions, as always, hit me up. Adam Tracy at adamtracy.io. Happy to answer any questions you have, and I'll talk to you later. Cheers.